Flaming Gorge Reservoir is 3/4 full. It is not drying up. The boat ramps are open, and the fish are biting, and the red cliffs above the water look exactly the way John Wesley Powell described them in 1869. And right now, roughly 1/3 of everything that reservoir holds is being drained on purpose through a 502-foot concrete arch dam and sent to a lake sitting at 23% of capacity and still falling. Nobody is arguing about whether this is happening. So why is a nearly full reservoir the emergency? Here are the numbers. As of the end of the day on July 5th, 2026, Flaming Gorge sits at a water level of 6,014.79 feet. That is 75% of the water it can hold. Full pool is 6,040 feet. Water flowing into the reservoir for the month of June came in at about 121,239 acre-feet. That is 31% of the average. The Bureau of Reclamation's forecast for July is 45,000 acre-feet, which is 22% of average. August, 26,000 acre-feet, 36% of average. September, 24,000 acre-feet, 52% of average. More water is leaving this reservoir than in any drought release in its history. Water is coming in at a fraction of normal, and the agency that runs the reservoir has already published where the line ends. By April of 2027, Flaming Gorge is set to sit at about 59% full, roughly 35 feet lower than it stood this spring. That is not the disaster plan. That is the plan working. But here's the detail that never made it into the press release. Before federal water managers reached for Flaming Gorge, they checked the other two. Blue Mesa, the largest reservoir in Colorado, Navajo, on the border of Colorado and New Mexico, both federal, both built for exactly this. And on April 17th, 2026, Reclamation announced it would take nothing from either one because their water levels are too low and the water coming in is too little to make it worth the trip. Flaming Gorge is not the emergency. Flaming Gorge is the last thing standing between the Colorado River and the emergency. And the West is emptying it on purpose, into a hole it may not be able to fill again. Green River, Wyoming, May 24th, 1869. A one-armed Civil War veteran named John Wesley Powell pushed 4 wooden boats off a sandbar called Expedition Island and started downstream. Within days, he passed through a canyon where the morning sun hit the rock and lit it up in reds and oranges. He wrote the name down, Flaming Gorge. Nearly 90 years later, the Bureau of Reclamation looked at the same country and saw storage. Work on Flaming Gorge Dam began in 1958 and finished in 1964. A thin curved wall of concrete, 502 feet from bedrock to top, 1,285 feet across. Behind it, the reservoir backed up 91 miles from northeastern Utah into southwestern Wyoming, flooding 4 separate gorges of the Green River and holding more than 3.7 million acre-feet of water, roughly twice the yearly flow of the Upper Green. It was one of the first storage units of the Colorado River Storage Project. And its job, written into the law that built it, was to hold water in the wet years so the upper basin states could keep sending water to the lower basin states in the dry years. For almost 60 years, that job was mostly just an idea on paper. Then in 2019, the 4 upper basin states signed a document called the Drought Response Operations Agreement. It gave Reclamation the legal power to pull water out of upstream reservoirs and send it down to Lake Powell if Powell ever got close to the level where Glen Canyon Dam stops making electricity. That number is 3,490 feet. Engineers call it minimum power pool. Signing that agreement looked like paperwork at the time. It was not. In the summer of 2021, Reclamation used it for the first time, deciding there was an urgent need to release 161,000 acre-feet out of upper basin storage. Flaming Gorge gave up the largest share. In 2022, it did it again, and by that summer, the water at Buckboard Marina on the Wyoming shore hit an all-time low. Then the snow came back. On March 7th, 2023, Reclamation stopped the drought releases for the rest of the plan year, and the reservoir climbed. That was the last good year. The winter of 2025 into 2026 brought the lowest snowpack ever recorded across the upper Colorado River Basin. March came in with record-breaking heat on top of it. By April, Reclamation's own count put total Colorado River system storage at about 36% full, and the lowest likely inflow to Lake Powell for the water year at 2.78 million acre-feet. That is 29% of the long-term average and one of the lowest figures ever put on paper. On April 9th, the governors of Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming put out a joint statement calling it a year with no match in the history of the Colorado River. On April 17th, Reclamation announced the release. Between 660,000 acre-feet and 1 million acre-feet out of Flaming Gorge, running from April of 2026 through April of 2027. At the same time, the yearly delivery from Lake Powell down to Lake Mead would be cut from 7.48 million acre-feet to 6 million acre-feet. Together, roughly 2.48 million acre-feet added to Powell, enough to raise it about 54 feet to a level of at least 3,500 feet by April of 2027. On April 22nd, Flaming Gorge was 79% full and 17 feet below the top. The Upper Basin states approved. The Interior Department signed off. In early May, the gates opened. The first move was what the marina owners call a flush. A hard, fast pulse of water pushed down the Green River, timed to copy the spring runoff that endangered native fish downstream have grown around. Reclamation ramped the flows up, held them, and then kept going. By Memorial Day weekend, Tony Valdez, who owns Buckboard Marina on the Wyoming shore, estimated the reservoir had dropped about 7 feet since April. By mid-June, the reporting from the shoreline was no longer about acre-feet. It was about buckled concrete and canceled reservations. By the end of the day, on July 5th, the reservoir stood at 6,014.79 feet, down from 79% full to 75% in roughly 10 weeks. Almost nobody outside 2 counties heard about this part, because it is not happening at Lake Mead, and it is not happening at Lake Powell. It is happening hundreds of miles upstream from either one, along the shore of the least populous county in Utah, where the 2020 census counted 935 people. Now zoom out. Everything that ends up in Flaming Gorge falls as snow on the Wind River Range. The Green River carries it south across the Red Desert, through the town of Green River, past Buckboard, into the reservoir. Below the dam, it runs through Browns Park, past Dinosaur National Monument, down through Utah, and joins the Colorado River in southern Utah. From there, it enters Lake Powell. Flaming Gorge to Lake Powell is one long piece of plumbing, and the Green River supplies a big share of everything Powell gets, which is exactly why the release works. Open the gates at Flaming Gorge in Utah, and weeks later, the surface of a lake in Arizona goes up. There is no pipeline, no pump, no aqueduct. There is just gravity, and several hundred miles of canyon. Now zoom in on the reservoir itself, because the shape of it matters more than the elevation number does. Underwater, Flaming Gorge is 4 flooded canyons stitched end to end. Near the top, the water spreads out across wide shallow shelves and long side coves, and a single foot of height covers a huge amount of surface. Down near the dam in Red Canyon, the walls close in. The reservoir gets deeper and narrower. So the first feet come off easily. They are wide, thin, and huge in volume. That is the water Reclamation is taking right now. The last feet are the opposite: narrow, deep, and stingy. You lose surface fast, and you gain almost no water for it, which means the drawdown does the most damage to exactly the places people use. Boat ramps sit on shelves. Marinas sit in coves. Kokanee spawn in the shallows. All of that lives in the top 35 feet. And it is exactly why the release can only be done once. Chris Winter is an environmental lawyer and the head of the Getches Wilkinson Center for Natural Resources, Energy, and the Environment at the University of Colorado Boulder School of Law. He has said on the record that releases of water from upper basin storage units are, in his words, like a one-time thing, unless a run of wet years happens to arrive. Think about what that means in real terms. Flaming Gorge works like the spare tank in the trunk of a car. You can pour the spare tank into the engine one time. What you cannot do is pour it in and also still have it in the trunk. The only thing that refills the spare tank is snow, and the snow this year was the worst on record. That is the whole mechanism. That is the entire story of the American West in 2026, sitting in one 91-mile reservoir on the Utah and Wyoming line. Brandon Gebhardt, Wyoming's commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission, put the state's position plainly when the release was approved. He said they would not be recommending it except for the historically dry conditions. Put plainly, the states that own this water called it what it is, something they had no other choice but to do. Not a strategy, not an adjustment, a last resort, on the record, in April. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. We cover Western water systems and the infrastructure holding them together every week, with the full picture you need to actually follow what is going on. By June, the physical damage had already arrived, and it did not arrive at Lake Powell. Start with the fishery. Kokanee salmon and trophy-sized lake trout draw tens of thousands of anglers to Flaming Gorge every year, and the money they spend holds up the recreation economy of southwestern Wyoming and northeastern Utah. As the water drops, the shallow shoreline habitat disappears, and the fish get pushed into a shrinking space toward the dam end of the reservoir. Valdez told Cowboy State Daily that the Kokanee spawning grounds will be completely gone by October. The population was just starting to hold its own without stocking. Second, the marinas. Over Memorial Day weekend, Valdez spent the holiday handing out refunds and repairing a boat ramp that had buckled into the shape of a pitched roof as the water pulled away from underneath it. One older man from Green River, walking with two canes, took his money back after he could not safely get down to his slip. Valdez had already lost roughly $30,000 in cancellations before the water even moved, purely from people reading the news in February. His marina loses access to its own drinking water at 6,010 feet because that is where the floating pump stops floating. In mid-June, the water sat 7 feet above it. Trucking replacement water in from Rock Springs costs about $1,200 for 8,000 gallons, which lasts the marina roughly 2 weeks. Moving the fuel dock and its lines could run as high as $100,000. For 50 years, high water at Buckboard has held between 6,030 and 6,040 feet. A 35-foot drop uncovers more than 400 feet of shoreline in places. Speaking to KUNC, Valdez called it devastating, not just to me, it's all the marina owners. Third, the businesses on the Utah shore. At Lucerne Valley Marina, Jessica and Brant Williams offered refunds to their longtime slip customers before the season started, expecting it to end early. Brant Williams told Utah News Dispatch they might not be open at all if this happens 2 years running. Jessica Williams held back tears describing the weight of it, and asked a question that has nothing to do with water science and everything to do with whether a marina survives. Whether people can afford the gas to drive out there at all. Fourth, the county. Daggett County holds the Utah side of Flaming Gorge and almost nothing else. Matt Tippett, chair of the 3-member county commission, is not panicking, and he is not pretending either. He described the drawdown to Utah News Dispatch in 6 words. It is significant. It is new. He said if it happens 2 or 3 years in a row, it may be dire, and that he does not believe the county is there yet. The county is now pushing mountain biking trails, all-terrain vehicle routes, and a shooting range, because that is what you do when your lake is set to lose 35 feet of height. Fifth, the river itself. The Green River below Flaming Gorge Dam is home to endangered native fish, and reclamation has to time and shape the releases around a 2005 biological opinion from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. The agency has been shaping the flows to copy spring runoff. The water is colder than usual, higher than usual, and faster than usual, and reclamation has warned anyone out on the water below the dam to use extreme caution. Sixth, the grid. Letting less water out of Lake Powell in order to raise Lake Powell means less water moving through Glen Canyon Dam, and less water moving downstream into Lake Mead. Reclamation has admitted that Hoover Dam's power-making capacity could fall by as much as 40% as early as this fall. Glen Canyon Dam alone supplies power to roughly 5 million people across Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. Emily Brandt, Energy Resource Manager at Heber Light and Power in Utah, told the Associated Press that the utility has raised its rates 13% over 5 years, while it replaces vanishing federal hydropower with electricity bought on the open market. That is the cascade. A reservoir in Wyoming drops, and a family in Utah pays more for electricity. A boat ramp buckles in Daggett County, and a turbine keeps turning in Arizona. Every one of those things is the same water, counted once, spent once, moving downhill. Roughly 40 million people across 7 states and Mexico draw on the Colorado River. The Colorado provides 27% of Utah's water supply. None of that changes because a marina in Wyoming has a bad summer. The bad summer in Wyoming is what keeps it from changing. This has all happened before on a smaller scale, and it is worth knowing how that turned out. In 2021 and 2022, Reclamation pulled emergency water out of Blue Mesa Reservoir near Gunnison, Colorado, under the same 2019 agreement. Blue Mesa is the largest reservoir in Colorado. The drawdown, stranded boat ramps in the middle of the season gutted the summer economy in a valley that depends on it and left a mark on state politics deep enough that Colorado officials still bring it up in talks 5 years later. What comes next is the part that still does not get said out loud. Blue Mesa never fully recovered. 5 years and one very good snow year later, it is still not full enough to be useful in an emergency. That is why it was not on the list this April. Neither was Navajo Reservoir on the Colorado and New Mexico border. Reclamation looked at both, ran the numbers on the water coming in, and decided there was not enough water in them, and not enough water coming to bother. 2 reservoirs. Spent. That is what the 2019 agreement bought. It bought time. The time got used. And nobody put anything back. Which leaves Flaming Gorge, standing alone as the last major storage unit in the upper basin with enough water to matter. And the release now underway will pull it down to roughly 59% by April of 2027, into a basin where the snowpack just set a record for being the worst ever measured. So what happens if next winter is dry too? Nobody can answer that yet. The data does not say. There is no third reservoir. Blue Mesa and Navajo are already out. Lake Powell's modern record low is 3,519.92 feet, set on April 13, 2023, and federal forecasts now show it falling below that mark before this year is over. Reclamation's June 24-month study projects Powell reaching minimum power pool at 3,490 feet in the spring of 2027, that is, with the Flaming Gorge water added. And the rules everyone has been working under are about to vanish. The 2007 interim guidelines that run the shared operations of Glen Canyon Dam and Hoover Dam end at the close of 2026. As of this summer, the 7 basin states have not agreed on what replaces them. If they cannot agree, the Interior Department has said it will simply decide. Becky Mitchell, Colorado's commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission, has said it about as plainly as anyone in the basin. No amount of lawyering is going to fix the math problem. So the questions stack up, and none of them have answers on paper. What refills Flaming Gorge if the snow does not come back? What does Reclamation reach for in 2028 when there is nothing upstream left to reach for? Why did 4 states sign an agreement whose only real tool was a reservoir that can be emptied exactly once? Why is the last full tank in the upper basin sitting behind a dam that was built to protect deliveries, not to become the deliveries? If 2.48 million acre-feet buys Lake Powell a 54-foot rise and 1 more year of spinning turbines, what does the year after that cost? And who pays for it? And the one nobody in Wyoming or Utah will say into a microphone. If Flaming Gorge is drawn down to 59% and the snow fails again, does anyone in the lower basin have a reason to care whether it ever comes back up? Andrea Travnicek, Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the United States Department of the Interior, said the department is still committed to keeping as much room to move as possible. That is the honest description of what this is. Room to move and nothing else. The next Flaming Gorge Working Group meeting is set for sometime in August. It is open to the public. Anyone can attend. And out on the Wyoming shore, at Buckboard Marina, there is a floating pump that supplies the marina with its drinking water. It sits on the surface, rising and falling with the reservoir, and it stops working at 6,010 feet. On July 5th, the reservoir stood at 6,014.79 feet. That is 4.79 feet of water between a marina in Wyoming and no water at all. The red cliffs above it look exactly the way Powell described them. The ramps are still open. The fish are still biting. Every morning the pump comes on, the water runs, and somebody walks down to the stake driven into the bank to see how far the lake fell overnight.